Hi everyone, my name's Lorenza and I'm going to show you how to stabilize a neckline in this video. You can see here on this lemon dress that the neckline has really stretched. So I'm going to take you through what I should have done when I was making this dress. The fabric is made from a stretch sateen. So here is the pattern that I use. It's called the Eliza Lex dress by Hand London. And I love this pattern. I've made it for work dresses a fair bit. But you can see when I pointed out on the lemon dress, the neckline is quite stretched. Now this is completely my fault. I should have stabilized the neckline with some tearaway stabilizer. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to use the same pattern, but I've cut it out in calico. When you stabilize this, anything with stretch fabric, jersey fabric, this is when you need to do this kind of stabilization. If this was a woven dress, you wouldn't need to because it wouldn't stretch like this. But I just also want to say that I think often people think this is a pattern making issue and they want to go in and fix the pattern and take in, so here's the front, people would start cutting and slashing from here. You don't need to. This is completely a construction issue. It is not a pattern making issue, it's a construction issue. Often this happens with sewing. So let me take you through what you will need and what we've got here. So these are just the pattern instructions. We don't need them, but just wanted to show you that's how the dress looks when it's made up. I've got the pattern pieces here and we will need them for when we do the tearaway interfacing because we need to essentially make like a mini pattern for the tearaway, sorry, not interfacing, tearaway stabilizer. I always go to call it interfacing. Here is the tearaway stabilizer. It looks just like black tissue paper. You can get it in black and white. I thought I'd use the black here just because I'm doing this example for you on calico, so it will show up easier. You'll be able to see it a bit better. You'd need some things to obviously mark your stabilizer, so whether that's fabric pens, normal pens, white pens, markers, that kind of thing. You're going to need a little ruler to be measuring it. You're going to need your bodice, the top, the dress, whatever it is that you're making made up. Now I've done this in calico. What I have done is I've made up the front already and you can see I've sewn it and overlocked it. And I've also made up the facing as well. But I haven't made up the back part of the bodice yet. And reason being is I think I'll take you through and just give you some extra tips and tricks as well about when we're sewing curves onto princess seam lines like this. So I've done half the pattern and this is the back section of the dress. And you can see I've put little W's on here for wrong side. So I'll take you through sewing, pressing, the order that I would do the overlocking and the way that I'm pressing and the way that I'm doing the overlocking from the right side, wrong side kind of thing as well. So I thought that was worth rather than me doing all the prep work for you, so I can show you a few other things. So that's the back of the dress. So first thing we need to do is start making this pattern that I was calling it, like a mini pattern, for out of the tearaway stabilizer. So I will come right back and show you how to do that. It's a stabilizer and we're going to be stabilizing the front and the back. So you need you need the front and the back pattern pieces. So this is the center front. So we're going to be stabilizing this section along the neckline here. And on the back, here is the center back where the zip would go, and we're going to be stabilizing along the back here. You could just do the front, but look, I think when you're working with stretch, I think you're better off doing the front and the back. I've worked with some fabrics where it just loves to stretch along a neckline, so best practice, do your front and your back. So here is the stabilizer. Like I said, it's kind of like tissue paper. Now, the mistake I always make, and I just want to point this out to you, is I go to trace this off. So essentially we're just tracing off the neckline, couple of centimeters, and we'll draw it in so it's like a little pattern there. The mistake I always make with this is I forget to place it on the fold, so I just want to point that out. So with this tissue paper, and I'll cut it and then go, oh hang on, I've only got one piece. Now it's not a disaster because you can just sew on half and then do the other half that way, but you're better off just cutting it once, cutting on the fold. Same as when you do your sewing. So sorry, I'm just unfolding the stabilizer here. And this has no grain line to it. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have a grain line to it because like I said, it's like tissue paper. Can you see how you can see through it? So we need it on a fold. Just trying to think of the best way to do this so I don't waste fabric because you know, the internet warriors tell me that I waste too much fabric all the time. All right, so we'll fold that bit there. Is that going to be enough? You can put a pattern weight down or something like this. So this is our front and we're just going to trace along there. So we've got it on the fold. There's the fold along there. We're just going to trace along the front. So you can see there's our front neckline. Now you could just do this by hand, but you know, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so let's do it around 2 centimeters. Now the reason we're doing it at 2 centimeters is because the stitch line on this garment, I know it's 1.5 centimeters, which would be about here, and that's where we'd be stitching when we're joining the facing onto this. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. So we want 2 centimeters because we want to make sure we're definitely capturing that 1.5. So 1.5, this is our stitch line here. And we just want to give it a bit of room, a bit of wiggle room. So we're doing 2 centimeters. So there's 2 centimeters. So that is your front, and I'll cut it out now and show you. So it's placed on the fold, and it's just 2 centimeters. This is where I'm saying it's like a little mini pattern. Whoops, I should have pinned that because now it's going to move. And I'm sure once I place this on here, it will make a little bit more sense to you. But so there is our tearaway facing. I probably should have done it all the way up there, but for the sake of this, you'll get the hang of it. So there's the front. And we're going to be placing that on there on the pattern and sewing it on. So let me get the garment in the calico so you can see what I mean. So here's the front of the Eliza Lex dress. And I did say it's the front, this is the other mistake I always make. We always want to sew this tearaway stabilizer. We always want to sew this onto the wrong side. A few times I've sewn it onto the right side. It's not a disaster, you can still rip it off, but it's better if you sew it to the wrong side. So I'm placing it here on the front just to show you that's the idea of it. But when we sew it on, we would be sewing it onto the wrong side. See, that's definitely the wrong side, and I'll pop some pins in it. And when we sew it on, we want to be sewing it as close to the stitch line as possible. Not that so you'd see it probably just inside the stitch line, but look, I just aim for the stitch line and maybe a mil in from that. So we'll pin it on because we'll be taking this over to the machine and sewing it on. So this is what is going to be stabilizing your neckline. Now, I know some people say, well, I can just do stay stitching, and a lot of patterns recommend stay stitching. I think stay stitching often stretches out your neckline even more. I used to do stay stitching and then I realized it's a disaster. So stay stitching, for those of you that don't know, in patterns it often says when you've got your pattern cut out, do some stitching from here. I think they usually say from the shoulder stitch down and from the other shoulder stitch down. And this is stay stitching, but I find it tends to stretch out, especially stretch garments. Like I said, this was a stretch sateen. I know I'm doing this on calico, so we're not going to get the same effect of the stretch, but I'm showing you how to do this. You do this on any kind of stretch fabric though. I stabilize everything. If it's like a sequin fabric with netting or it's a jersey, I've done quite a few sequin tops and dresses. I've always put stabilizer in there because they just stretch around your neck and they look homemade and they don't look great. So you can see I've pinned it here on the wrong side. So we'll be sewing it along there to put this, to sew this stabilizer onto the garment, onto the front. Now we also need to make one for the back. I know I haven't made up the back part of the garment yet, but while we're here, I will do the pattern on the stabilizer as well, just so that's done, and then we'll construct the back part of the garment. And this one, this doesn't have to be on the fold actually, because there is a zip in here. So we are just cutting 2 separate sections here. So we will sew one onto one side of the garment and then one onto the other side. So same thing, we are just tracing around. This is the back pattern. You can see I'm not being super precise here. So that's the back neckline. Whoop! It's wanting to slide away. I can put away the patterns now because we're done with that. But just so I don't forget, that was the center back. I would mark these because sometimes, I mean, you could always place it back on the pattern, but sometimes once you cut it out, you're like, oh, hang on, which was the shoulder seam, which was the back? Mark everything. So let's measure this one in 2 centimeters. You can see I'm being quite rough here, and I will put a pin through it. So when we cut it out, it stays. So let's just pop a pin there, and that is our back stabilizer we will cut out. Oh, so sorry, just knocked the phone. So I'll cut this out now. So that is the back stabilizer cut out. I'll get this out of the way. So there's the back stabilizer, and the important thing about doing the stabilizing is you need to remember at what part of the construction you do it, because often I'll forget and I just construct the garment and then think, oh no, I haven't put the stabilizer in. What you want to do is you definitely want to be putting in this stabilizer before you sew your shoulder seams. So you can see we've pinned it on the front. We're going to sew that on, and same as with the back. We need to, I can pin these on now. So there's our center back, because I still need to put these side backs on as well. So I'll pin these center backs, stabilizers on. Yeah, so you want to do this before you do your shoulder seams. And I know often you cut out the pattern, shoulder seams are the very first thing you do. So you sort of have to stop yourself and say, hang on, do I need to stabilize this? Because if you do, stop, go and cut some stabilizer out, sew it on, and then you can keep constructing your garment. Now, look, I've done this right. I have put it on the wrong side. Here's me who always accidentally puts it on the right side. There's our wrong side. So we've pinned on the stabilizer. So we can sew the stabilizer on when we sew the side backs on. You can try and build this into your construction. Don't see it as like a pain that you have to do it, because it's going to make your garment sit so much better, look so much better. So take the time to do it, and yeah, just work it into your construction. So we'll take it over and sew these bits here, and I'll do it at the same time that I'm putting on these side backs, so it's not so onerous on us. While I am here though, you can see I've marked my little notches, so I might just pop a pin in. So obviously we want to do right sides together, don't we? So they are our two right sides, and I'll just pop a pin in there because we know we're matching them. But I always put my most curved part of the pattern onto the bottom. I'll show you when I'm sewing it over at the machine. So that means we need to flip the pattern over here, and I'll be putting the pin in from this side. And we'll do the same, this one over here. So let's go right sides together. But I will be having this curve on the bottom when I'm sewing it to help ease in that curve. See how this curve is a lot more curved than this part of the pattern. And in order to fit it, and to fit it really well onto your onto the garment, you want to put this curved bit onto the bottom, because the feed dogs will help ease that in. I cannot say this enough. I think those of you that follow me on Instagram know how much I go on about this, but it makes sewing curved seams like this just an absolute dream once you get the hang of it. And I'm talking too much, and I almost pinned it on the wrong side. We want this on the bottom, so I'm going to flip this over and put a pin there, because we'll be sewing it from this side. So curved bit, always on the bottom, always. See how that's just going to beautifully fit when it's on the bottom? Go like that. All right, we'll take this over to the machine. We will sew our side backs onto the backs. We'll also sew this stabilizer on. We'll sew the stabilizer onto the front as well. And yeah, and I will overlock. I'll take you through overlocking. I'll do that bit next. Let's go over to the machine. Okay, we're over at the machine, and I've got the front here, and I'm just going to sew the stabilizer on. So when I was saying we want to be sewing this, I've got this masking tape here that we know that's 1.5 centimeters. That is the seam allowance of this dress. So we want to be sewing it in a little bit less than 1.5, because we don't want this to be showing through when we stitch the facing on. So you just want to, like, I'm leaving a mil, 2 mil there, but we want to stitch it as close to the stitch line as possible. We don't want to be stitching on like 5 mil here, because then we've still got a lot of room for this neckline to stretch. So we'll sew it about 1.3, 1.4 kind of thing, as close to the stitch line as possible. I'm going to sew along here, like I said, at that 1.3. There we go. We've stabilized the front part of the dress. Back with the backs. So we'll do the stabilizer first, just because it's there and then it's out of the way. The pins aren't going to stab us, that kind of thing. So when we're doing the side back, so same thing, just about the 1.3. Like I said, this doesn't have to be perfect, but it is going to make your garment perfect. All right, that's one side of the back done, and then we'll do the other. Right, so now we need to sew the side backs onto the backs. So like I said, the bit with the curve is going to go on the bottom. And when I say the bottom, we have the fabric. Here's the base of the machine. We're putting it on the bottom. So the piece that's straighter with less curve always goes on the top, always goes underneath your foot. The piece of the curve goes on the very bottom of all your layers when you're sewing. And look, you're probably stressing out that I don't use pins. I don't think you need to on curves like this. I'm placing it with my fingers here at the end. I know this has to join here. We've got a pin here holding where the notches are. And as I'm getting towards the end, I'll hold that with my fingers, and I'll know where this needs to join as well. So I used to put lots of pins in. You don't need to. Once you put the curve on the bottom, just let the machine do its job and just practice. All right, I'm probably saying that now I'm going to do a terrible job of this. No, I'm pretty good at curves. All right, so I'm obviously going to back stitch. Let's sew this side back onto this back. And I'm keeping it in line with that 1.5 of the masking tape. So I've got there, I can pull that nice and taut because we know that notch is there. That needs to line up. So we can pull this nice and taut as we're trying to, and you can put your hand under. See my hand under here? This is gonna, see how this can pull the fabric in? Do that. You don't need to control it all from the top. So that's my other little trick. Use your hands under here. Don't sew over them, please. But yeah, I can pull on those pins. I can maneuver that piece of fabric in and out perfectly. So as we get to the pin here, try not to sew over the pin. I will take it out, I promise. There you go. And see, we've still got, see that huge curve? And this bit's going this way. I know when I first started sewing, I was like, these pieces do not go together, but they absolutely do. So now we just need to get around this curve, which I will expertly show you how I do, and then you can copy me and do just the same. So see here now I'm getting towards the end, and I know I'm going to need to just give this a bit more of a pull. Because this is on a curve, this is on the bias, this is going to want to stretch, and we know we need to meet these two pieces up at the end here. So we can just give a bit of a pull because we're needing to ease this curve into this and back stitch. All right, so that is the center back. I'll zoom out a bit. There's one of the backs, and there's the beautiful side back we've sewn in. And see, our stabilizer is on the wrong side where we want it. So with this, now I will see how that, now this is where people would say, oh, you need to clip that curve. Do not clip that curve. We're overlocking it. I will take it to the overlocker and just show you the way that I'd be overlocking it because of the way that I'm going to press it. So I'll overlock it. I'll show you how I'm going to press it, which direction I'm going to press it in. I won't do the other one. I'll do that one off camera just so we're ready to go. So I'll show you how I'm going to overlock it and press it, and then we're ready to attach this to our front. But yes, you can see there, see that curve. When we overlock it, we're going to trim that off. Okay, we're at the overlocker, and I think what I wanted to show you here, I've also sewn the other back. So they're both sewn. So there's our center backs, and we're going to overlock them. Now, when you're pressing seams like this, I would be pressing them in. So the way I'm going to overlock that, and some people said, I've never even thought of this, but I want the nice side of the overlocking showing. So because I know I'm going to press it this way, I'm going to do the overlocking on that side. So then that's the nicer part of the overlocking showing. But you can see here, it is cutting off all this excess seam allowance, which I would be trimming off with scissors if I wasn't overlocking it. But because the overlocker has a knife and it's cutting it and finishing off all this edge, I don't need to cut it with the scissors. The overlocker is doing it for me. And see all that waviness? It's completely gone now because we've cut off that excess seam allowance. And just to show you again, so there's the other side. We want the overlocking on the nice side, so I'm going to grab it here and then just turn it, and then I'll start overlocking. I'll overlock that edge off, then I'll give it a press, and then I'll meet you back over at the table. So we're back at the table, and I thought I would just show you how I would press this. So always use a pressing hand for curves like this, and you just pull the curve sort of onto the pressing hand like that. See how that's just really helping get that curve. And I always press seams like this at the back towards the center back. Same as seams at the front. You can see these seams on the front, press them towards the center front, just because it looks nicer. So that's the front, the seams are pressed towards the center front, and on the back we'd be pressing them towards the center back. And once you have trimmed them down and overlocked them like this, they just want to sit nice and flat for you. I don't feel like you've got to do a lot of pressing. I always press from the wrong side, and then I press from the right side as well. That one looks pretty good. I don't feel like I need to do too much work on that one. Same as with this one. Just give it a bit of a light press. You never want to press too much. I find that if you overpress your garment, it can just look bad. And I always concentrate, the parts where you want to press and make sure that seam is nice and open is where you've got another stitch line going. So for me, I always make sure where I'm going to be stitching again. So I'll be stitching the skirt onto this bodice, this top, when the dress is done. So you definitely want those seams pressed open. Because if they weren't pressed open and then you go and sew your skirt onto here, you're losing a few mil in there. So if you're going to press and you're lazy or you can't be bothered, you don't have enough time, just make sure you always please press those intersection points. So here as well, because we'll be putting a sleeve on, you want to make sure that's nice and flat, otherwise we'll lose a few mil there and your sleeve won't fit as nicely as it could. Plus it could just look a bit folded over and yuck with the sleeve, so make sure you always get that nice and flat. So a little bit of pressing, that looks pretty good. So next steps, where are we up to? Here's the back, here's the other back, here's our two backs, there's our center back. I would overlock these as well. I will overlock them actually, and then I'll do the next step. The next steps, we're putting right sides together and we're going to be joining the shoulder seams. So that's the next step. So we've done the stabilizer, we've constructed the front, the back, we've stabilized the neck, and the next steps would be sewing the shoulder seams together. So like I said, often at the start of construction, it's one of the first things you do is the shoulder seams, and you just need to stop, put that stabilizer on, and now we can do the shoulder seams. So we will go back over to the machine, do the shoulder seams, I'll overlock them, press them. I'll try and just do a bit of the construction because it's just, this will have to be turning into such a long video doing this. And then we will be doing the facing, and I will also overlock all the bottom of the facing because I'm trying to show you how I would be finishing this if this was the proper finished garment as well. You can see that I've overlocked the center backs of the facing here. So I will sew the shoulder seams together, overlock them. I'm going to overlock the bottom of the facing and I'm going to overlock the center backs down here because that's where the zip would go. So I'll just pop some pins in here. Honestly, I feel like for shoulder seams, you never need that many pins. I pop like one in so I don't get them mixed up or muddled when I go back to the machine. So pretty simple there. Let's put the shoulder seams together. I am back and I did a fair bit of construction while I was away. So I did overlocking around the outside of the facing, and I just want to show you here. I did it so on the right side is the nicer side of the overlocking. So this side down when you're putting it through the overlocker. And now I also overlocked the center back seams like I said I would. So there's the center back. Not seam, sorry, just the center back, because the zip would be going in here. And again, this is the nice side of the overlocking. So it has a nicer finish to it, to the back where the looper threads are. What else did I do? I did the shoulder seams. So I've sewn them, I've overlocked them, and then I pressed them. That is the order that I tend to do. So I sew, wait, did I say that around the wrong way? I sew, I overlock, and then I press. And that was the other thing I wanted to point out. I had pressed them towards I should have pressed it towards the back. Just looking at this, it looked like I've pressed it towards the front. So for shoulder seams, oh, this one's right, I've pressed it towards the back. You always press, I try and imagine everything on your garment, pressing it towards the back, unless it's seams at the front where you're pressing it towards your center front. So center back seams, darts at the back, or seams like this where it's a side back and your center back, you're always pressing towards the center back, and same as with your shoulder seams, pressing towards the center back. So the next step is putting the facing on. So to do that, we've got our bodice. We'll put right sides together. So remember, all that stabilizer is still there. So we've got to put the facing on, and I have already sewn the facing together, the shoulder seams, and overlocked it and pressed it, and again pressed it towards the back. So we're putting right sides together and we'll put the facing on. So obviously we're keeping on this stabilizer the whole way, and there is a point where I'll show you where you can rip it off if you don't want the stabilizer there anymore. I sometimes rip it off if you can see it, but if you can't see it once the garment's done, I just leave it. But anyway, we'll get there. So I need to pin on this facing now, and when I'm pinning this facing on, I'll be pinning at the back. I always press where the seams are, because obviously we want these seams to line up on each side of the seam allowance. Now, actually, these should all be pressed the same way, shouldn't they? It looks like I've pressed this one the wrong way. So I'll force it with the pin and be pressing it all towards the back. If you think or feel if the fabric's really bulky, then push one way and one the other way, so you're getting it a bit thinner. Pin those seams together on the shoulder seams. Pin the other shoulder seam here. So match up those seams, and then just so this is kind of even on the front, just make sure it's nice and flat and lining up nicely. You can see there's a bit more, feels like there's a bit more fabric here, and that is probably because of the stabilizing. that we've put on, because that has stabilized that curve. So that's why now on this facing, you're seeing there's a bit of extra fabric. So what we'll do, because there's that bit of extra fabric, we're wanting to ease that in, we will sew it from the other side. So instead of me putting the pins on this side, because we want this on the bottom, I'm going to flip the garment over and I'll put the pins in from this side. So we want the facing on the bottom and the bodice on the top. So I just need to put all the pins in from the other side. And this will help ease in that excess fabric, because if we pin it and sew it from the other side, we're probably going to get some bubbles and some puckers, and we don't want that. So you see, I'm just trying to even this out on the front. Pop some pins in, and I'll move those pins or I put them on the shoulder seams. We'll take it over to the machine and one more pin to pop in. And we're going to sew it with the facing down. The facing down, to sew the facing onto the bodice. So we're just going to be sewing on the stitch line, which is 1.5 centimeters, and we're going to be sewing the whole way around there to sew the facing onto the bodice. So I'll take it over to the machine and do that now. We're at the machine and now I'm going to sew on that facing, and as I said, I've got the facing on the bottom, so we're going to sew that facing onto the bodice, and it will ease the facing on as we're sewing it. So I'm just doing it at the 1.5 seam allowance, do a few back stitches, and you can see here, I'll zoom in, see how there is my stabilizing stitch there, and as I'm doing 1.5 you can see that I'm just sewing just on the other side of it. I hope you can see it. I know it's black. You can see here that the facing is easing in really nicely. So there was definitely felt like and looked like there was more fabric there on the facing because we had stabilized the neckline. I can feel there's still a bit too much fabric there as I'm sewing it. It's just making sure that's nice and flat as I'm sewing it. But yeah, the feed dogs, because it's on the bottom, it's going to take through that fabric a bit quicker than the fabric on the top. And you can use this to your advantage. This is why I love using the feed dogs. Yeah, for this kind of thing. For sewing curves, for easing in bulk, they are brilliant once you know how to use it to your advantage. Before I knew this, I used to just really struggle with trying to get seams to meet. So there we go, we've done that front, past the side seam, then we've just got to do the back, and we've sewn the whole facing on. And then I'll take you back to the desk and I'll show you what we do after this in regards to whether we want to rip off this stabilizer, and then we need to trim off excess seam allowance, etc. So we've finished here. Okay, we're back at the desk and you get a better look at this. So the facing is on. And of course it's not going to want to turn because it's got this, it's still got the 1.5 seam allowance. So when you've got something with a curve this big, it's not going to want to turn. It's going to want to stay going the other way. And this is I think one of the most important things about when you're learning how to sew. I never understood why curves wouldn't stay. I'd be trying to force them, and I know you meant to clip them in, but if you've been following me for a while, you know I do not believe in clipping curves or clipping seams, clipping curves in at all. When I was studying fashion, we learnt to just take down your seam allowance. So that is what I'm going to do now. So in order to get that facing to try and turn nicely, we need to trim down off this seam allowance. So I'm going to trim 1 centimeter off it and just leave 5 mil. You could measure it with a sewing gauge, but I'm just going to eyeball it because I know about 5 mil in order to cut it off. So if you haven't followed me or don't know my views on clipping into curves, if you clip and cut in all these clips into here, you can see it. You're going to see it when it turns through, and it just looks really messy and really homemade. So the way that I was taught when I was studying, and because this is an industry standard, is your seam allowance would just be less. It would never be 1.5 centimeters. Now, commercial patterns tend to be 1.5 centimeters. I think it's because so you can alter it. If it's, it's too big, too small, that's why, I think that's why they're 1.5 centimeters. But they are gigantic. They do not need to be that big. And it makes turning curves and doing sleeves and neck facings, neck linings, everything like this makes it very hard because there's this gigantic seam allowance and people don't know what to do with it, or they think they need to clip into it. You don't need to do that. You just need to take your seam allowance down. So I'm cutting it down to 5 mil, or you could always take it off the pattern and not go to all this effort of cutting it out, sewing it on, then you're cutting it off again. So when I draft my own patterns, I tend to take my seam allowances down to 1 centimetre everywhere and 5 mil on anything with a curve on it. It just makes it easier. You're just doing a lot less cutting and trimming. So we're trimming all this off, and this will make it just turn through a lot nicer and easier and flatter. Right, so I've trimmed all that off. Now, at this point, you can tear off the tear away stabiliser. And in some patterns where it recommends stabiliser, it then says, now tear it off. Because this is going to be hidden, so next thing is we're going to turn that facing over. So the only time I've ripped it off is when it's been a netting kind of fabric, and when I turned it over, you could see that stabiliser on that side. It was showing through the netting. So if you had or even like a chiffon that's a bit see-through and you could see it, then absolutely you'd rip it off. And it does just rip off really easily like that. So I'll just show you. But because I'm probably going to make this dress again out of a stretch sateen, I'd leave it. You're not going to see it through a stretch sateen, but you'd see it through, let me grab a fabric that I can, so say if you were doing it like on this kind of fabric, not that you'd use black, you'd probably use white, but through, see there, you'd probably would see that. So yes, you'd rip it off. So I'll show you how easily it does just come off. You can see there it comes off really easily, and it's ripping along that stitch line. It's coming off really easily, but I will leave the rest. So that's it, just rips off. It's like tissue paper. Amazing. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to understitch. So to keep facings down, you need to understitch them. And in order to understitch, so what the understitching does is you're taking all the seam allowance, you're taking the facing, you're taking the seam allowance of the bodice, and you're pushing it all to one side or pulling it all, and then you're going to stitch it down on the facing. So there's the bodice, this is the facing, and when I've got a pin and point it out, but we're going to stitch about like maybe 2 mil in, 1 mil in along there. That is understitching. And when you understitch, what that does is it stops the facing wanting to pop up all the time. So I know we've trimmed this down, but if you just tried to press this down now and wear it, your facing is just going to want to keep rolling up all the time and peeking out. So you could turn it over, give it a press, but it's just going to want to keep popping up. So what we do is we understitch it. So that is where we, like I said, grab all see, I did feel the fabric puckering a bit there. That's all right though, this is a mock-up, so it doesn't matter. So understitching, this is where we grab the facing, grab the seam allowance there, we pull it all to one side, and we're going to stitch along. And we can do this the whole way around the neck because there is a zip in the back of it. This is hard, it's such a big top. But essentially we're understitching from here, the whole way around the front, all the way up to the back again. When I understitch, what I tend to do is just line that seam up with that side of the foot. Let me try and zoom right in so I can show you. When I'm pressing and doing the pressing of the understitching, I think I always prefer to press from the wrong side where I can see the understitching. I know this is in black, so it's very obvious where it is, but look, you can do it from both sides. I think I prefer doing it from the wrong side because the heat can be damaging to the garment, but I think I just prefer seeing it roll over a little bit. See how you can see, you know, a 1/2 mil maybe rolling in, because that's fine. We want it to look like that. What we don't want is from the other side is any of this ever rolling up this way. So I feel like you get a better idea of it when you're looking at it from the back side, the facing side. So we'll just press that around. You can see it's turned through beautifully because of the understitching and because of the way that we trimmed down that seam allowance. We didn't clip it, we trimmed it down. I know people complain about their facings flipping up, but if you understitch them and tack them down at the side seams, shoulder seams, that kind of thing, or there's a sleeve on it, they will absolutely stay down, stay out of your way. You could always top stitch it. I'm not a fan of top stitching though, I don't think it looks great. So that is the facing all done, and we have stabilized the neckline there. So that is the bodice of this dress. I have basically sewn the whole bodice with you. There's the back. So yes, we need to put the zip in and the sleeves still, but the facing's all done. That stabilizing of the neckline is all done, and that is the most important thing, because if this was a stretch garment or a stretch sateen, it would look exactly like that lemon dress I showed you at the start where it had stretched. But because we have stabilized it, and I think it was really easy for us to see how the facing, there was more fabric of the facing, so that really showed just how much that tearaway stabilizer had stabilized the calico on the front of the bodice. So I think that really showed there. It was definitely a few mil, and you could see even here where there was a bit too much fabric. And we had to ease in that facing because it was stabilized. So that curve, any curve when you cut it and that's on the bias, it's going to just want to stretch out. So by stabilizing it, it won't stretch out, and when you're wearing it, it would sit nice and flat. So that is, in a very long way, because I've taken you through sewing the whole bodice of this top, because I just wanted to show some other parts about like the overlocking and the facing and the understitching, just so it's a bit more of an in-depth tutorial. But that is how you stabilize a neckline so it won't curve when you're wearing it. As I said, it's not a pattern making issue, it is 100% a construction issue. So that is the front of the bodice all done. This pattern, as I said, is Eliza Lex, not sponsored or affiliated or anything, by Hand London, and I love this dress. The pleats at the front are beautiful, the princess seams make it fit really well. Like I said, I've made it for work a lot, and I make it in stretch sateen because I think it fits really well. So I hope you really enjoyed that. I hope you can use this stabilizing technique on any of your stretch necklines. It's absolutely worth it. Your necklines will just sit so much better. It will look so much more professional, and yeah, you'll just be much happier with your garments. If we go to so much effort cutting them, sewing them, and making everything look perfect, you may as well just do this extra step where you're making that little additional pattern with your paper pattern and that 2 centimeters with the stabilizer, and then sewing it on, and just see it as part of the construction of your garment. It only takes, look, maybe an extra 10 minutes to have to make that pattern and to sew it on, but it is well worth it. So I hope you really enjoyed that video. Thank you so much for watching.